Maya rebuilt what fire destroyed, until she found gold, hidden inside the cross, sealed beneath prayers and ash. Her grandmother spent 40 years trying to return it. Some inheritances aren't meant to be kept, only burned. Maya didn't recognize the church until she was standing in front of it. 12 years can reshape memory, but fire reshapes everything else. St. Catherine's had been white stone and tall windows, light pooling on polished pews like something holy made visible. Now it was bones. Charred beams reached toward gray sky like blackened fingers, grasping at nothing. The stained glass, blues and golds she remembered watching during endless Sunday services, had melted into pools of color on scorched stone, frozen mid-drip like tears that forgot how to fall. She stepped closer. The smell hit her before anything else. Old smoke, the kind that doesn't wash away with rain, embedded so deep in wood and stone it becomes part of the structure itself. Damp ash, burned paint, something underneath it, all that might have been incense once, or just the ghost of what used to be sacred. The deed sat folded in her jacket pocket, still crisp from the lawyer's envelope. St. Catherine's Church and surrounding property, transferred to Maya Elizabeth Cordero upon the death of Elena Cordero, her grandmother's final gift, or final burden. Maya wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. The town felt different too. Hollow Creek had never been warm, but now the silence around the church felt deliberate, accusatory almost. She'd driven past 3 people on Main Street. All of them had looked away. No one waved. No one stopped to ask if she needed help unloading the truck she'd rented, packed with tools she barely knew how to use and optimism she knew wouldn't last. Her grandmother had written one letter before the stroke took her voice. Maya had read it 17 times on the drive from Portland, searching for clarity in sentences that only offered questions. Some things only you can finish. You'll know when you see it. The church remembers what I couldn't forget. She stepped through what used to be the entrance. No doors remained, just the iron frame twisted by heat into something that looked like wrought prayer. Inside, the roof was mostly gone. Late afternoon light filtered through burned rafters, casting shadows that moved wrong, stretched too long by the angle of sun through storm-cleared clouds. It had rained recently. Puddles reflected sky where the floor tiles had cracked and buckled, creating mirrors that showed her the church as it might look from heaven or from below. Her boots left prints in the ash. The pews were mostly rubble now. She walked slowly down what used to be the center aisle, her hand trailing along the remains of wood that had once been smooth and dark. Her fingers came away gray. She found the spot where she used to sit, 3rd row from the back, always on the left, because her grandmother said that's where you could hear the organ best. The pew was still there, somehow. Ash-covered, split down the middle, but recognizable. Maya sat down carefully. The wood groaned but held. She remembered her grandmother's hands folded in prayer, the rosary beads clicking softly, the way Elena's lips moved in silent conversation with something Maya had never quite believed in. The memory was warm, solid. But when she placed her own hand on the pew's surface, the wood crumbled beneath her fingers like it had been waiting 12 years to finally surrender. The sound of it breaking was quieter than she expected. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans, but then stopped. Looked at the ash on her palms. Instead of brushing it away, she pressed her hands together, let the char settle into the lines of her skin. If she was going to rebuild this place, she might as well start by carrying it with her. The altar area was worse. The lectern had collapsed inward, the pulpit reduced to a skeleton of metal brackets. But standing at the center, impossibly intact, was the iron cross. Maya had seen it 1,000 times as a child. 6 feet tall, simple design, mounted on a stone base that her grandmother used to polish until it gleamed. Now the cross was blackened, its surface coated in char and soot, but unbroken, whole, as if fire had tried to consume it and failed. She walked toward it slowly, her footsteps echoing in the hollow space. Wind moved through the burned rafters above, creating a sound like breathing. Or whispering. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang, not from St. Catherine's, but from the Baptist church 3 streets over. The sound carried differently now, with no walls to stop it. Maya reached out and touched the cross. The iron was cold despite the afternoon sun, rough with char, textured in ways it hadn't been before. She ran her hand along the vertical beam, feeling the damage, the way heat had warped the metal without breaking it. Her fingers caught on something, grooves, deliberate and deep, hidden beneath the soot. Not damage, intention. She pulled her hand back, stared at the black residue on her fingertips. The cross had been marked, carved, changed by something other than fire. Behind her, the floor creaked. Maya turned, heart sudden in her throat, but the church was empty. Just whined through ruined walls, just shadows moving across broken glass. Just the weight of something waiting beneath scorched stone and ash-covered memory. Patient as a secret held too long. She looked back at the cross, at the grooves her fingers had found, at the way it stood untouched while everything around it had burned. Her grandmother's letter had said she'd know when she saw it. Maya didn't know anything yet, but she knew she wasn't leaving, not until she understood why some things survive fire and what they hide when they do. 3 days later, Maya's hands stopped looking like her own. Blisters had formed across her palms by the 2nd morning, burst by the 3rd. Now her skin was raw in places, calloused in others, stained with ash and wood oil, and something darker she didn't want to identify. She worked dawn to dusk, clearing debris with a methodical precision that felt like prayer. Or penance. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. The rhythm helped, lift, carry, stack. Hammer against nail, the sound ringing sharp through hollow space. The physical exhaustion kept other thoughts at bay, the ones about her grandmother's final months in that sterile hospice room, the visits Maya had promised to make but kept postponing. Next week, she'd said, when work slows down. But work never slowed, and then there was no next week, just a funeral where half the town showed up and nobody met her eyes. The letter had arrived with the deed, her grandmother's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. Some things only you can finish. Maya didn't know what that meant. She only knew that stopping felt worse than the pain in her hands. By the 4th day, she'd cleared enough debris to see the full scope of what remained. The stone walls were mostly intact, though smoke-stained and cracked. The floor needed replacing. Every pew would have to be rebuilt from scratch. The roof, she tried not to think about the roof. She needed help. The realization came with a familiar taste of failure. The contractor arrived on a gray morning that threatened rain but never delivered. Daniel Reeves. Mid-40s, weathered face, hands that looked like they knew how to build things properly. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just looking, before he finally stepped inside. "You're serious about this?" he said, not a question. "Yes." He walked the perimeter slowly, testing walls, examining the foundation. His eyes kept returning to the cross. Maya noticed but didn't comment. Everyone looked at the cross eventually. It was impossible not to, standing there, blackened but whole, while everything around it had surrendered to flame. "I can help," Daniel said finally, "but I need to know you understand what you're taking on." "I understand." He studied her for a moment, longer, then nodded. "We start tomorrow. Bring work gloves, real ones." He left without saying anything else. The work began in earnest after that. Daniel brought supplies, lumber and nails, tools Maya had only seen in hardware stores. A generator that coughed to life like something waking from sleep. They worked mostly in silence, which suited Maya fine. She didn't want to explain why she was doing this. Didn't want to hear herself say out loud that maybe if she rebuilt what fire destroyed, she could rebuild the part of herself that had failed to show up when it mattered. The sounds became familiar. Hammer on nail, rhythmic and steady. The rasp of saw through wood. The creak of beams settling into place. Sawdust caught afternoon light through the broken roof, floating golden like snow that forgot how to fall. The smell of fresh-cut lumber mixed with the lingering scent of smoke, the kind that lived, in stone now, permanent as memory. Maya's hands bled again, but differently this time. Splinters embedded beneath skin. Small wounds she barely noticed until evening when she'd pull them out one by one. The weight of new wood against her shoulder became comforting. Solid. Real. She caught Daniel watching the cross again during their second week. Not working, just standing there, staring at it like he was trying to solve an equation written in charred iron. "Something wrong with it?" Maya asked. He startled slightly, turned. "No, just, it's remarkable it survived." "My grandmother said it was blessed." Maybe it was. His tone suggested he didn't believe in blessings. They went back to work. Each evening, after Daniel left, Maya stayed. She'd started a ritual without meaning to, lighting a candle at the base of the cross, sitting in the ash-covered space where the front pew used to be, speaking to her grandmother in whispers that barely qualified as words. "I'm trying," she'd say. "I don't know if this is what you meant, but I'm trying. I'm sorry I didn't come more. I'm sorry I didn't understand." The candle flame would flicker in drafts that moved through broken walls, casting shadows that made the cross seem taller. Sometimes Maya would reach out and touch it again, feeling those grooves beneath the char, trying to understand what they meant. The marks felt deliberate, not random damage, but something carved with intention. She never mentioned them to Daniel. 3 weeks in, they were framing the first wall when he finally spoke about something other than measurements and materials. "You know what people say about this place?" Maya looked up from the beam she was holding. "What do they say?" Daniel hammered in another nail. The sound echoed. "Nothing good." She waited for him to continue. He didn't. "That's not an answer," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He moved to the next section, leaving Maya holding the question and the beam both, feeling the weight of things he wouldn't name. That night, alone with her candle, Maya noticed something she hadn't before. The shadow the cross cast on the back wall. It didn't match the shape of the cross itself. Too thick in places. Too angular. She stood, moving closer, trying to understand what she was seeing. The candle flame guttered suddenly, though there was no wind. When it steadied, the shadow looked normal again. Maya pressed her hand against the cross one more time, feeling those grooves beneath the char. Feeling something else too, a coldness that had nothing to do with iron or evening air. A coldness that felt like secrets held too long, waiting in darkness for someone to finally ask the right questions. She didn't know what people said about this place, but she was starting to suspect she should. The measurements were wrong. Maya noticed it first on a Tuesday morning, checking her tape measure against the original foundation blueprints she'd found buried in a file box in the church basement. The distance between the altar wall and the back exterior wall, 18 feet according to the blueprints. 17 feet, 4 inches when she measured it herself. She measured again. Same result. 8 inches of space that existed on paper but not in stone. "Daniel," she called across the nave, where he was reinforcing the north wall frame. "Can you verify something?" He came over, took the tape measure without speaking, ran it himself, frowned, looked at the blueprints, looked at the wall. Could be a drafting error, he said. An 8-inch drafting error? He handed the tape measure back. Old buildings settle. Foundations shift. Not 8 inches in 60 years. Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned back toward his work without answering. Maya stared at the wall. Solid stones, smoke-stained, but intact. She pressed her palm against it, feeling for hollowness, for anything that would explain the discrepancy. The stone was cold, colder than it should be in afternoon light. A draft came from somewhere, subtle but definite, carrying the smell of earth and mildew and something older. That night she dreamed of fire, not the blaze that destroyed St. Catherine's 2 years ago, but something older, ancient almost. The church stood whole and white in her dream, but flames moved through it anyway, deliberate and searching. Shadows walked inside the fire, human-shaped but wrong, their movements purposeful. They carried something, voices speaking words Maya couldn't understand, but felt in her bones like warning. She woke at 3 a.m, sheets damp with sweat, the smell of smoke so real she checked the motel room for fire before remembering where she was. She didn't go back to sleep. The next day, Daniel barely spoke. He found reasons to work in different areas, always on the opposite side of the nave from wherever Maya was. She caught him once, standing motionless before the cross, his lips moving silently like prayer or argument. When he noticed her watching, he picked up his hammer and disappeared outside. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked that afternoon. "I don't know what you mean." "The measurements, the things people say, whatever keeps making you stare at that cross like it's going to speak." Daniel set down the saw he'd been holding. For a moment she thought he might actually answer. Instead he said, "I need to pick up supplies. I'll be back tomorrow." He left before she could respond. Maya stood alone in the church as afternoon light filtered through broken rafters, casting shadows that seemed too long for the angle of the sun. The cross stood at the center of it all, blackened and silent, those grooves beneath the char still waiting to make sense. She pulled out her notebook, sketched the cross's shape, tried to map the pattern of the grooves. They formed something, letters maybe, or symbols, worn smooth by decades of touch before the fire sealed them beneath soot. She traced them with her finger, feeling the cold, iron, feeling that draft again from somewhere nearby. The air smelled like rain. By evening, the storm arrived, the first real rain since Maya had come to Hollow Creek. It started slowly, a few drops darkening the ash-covered floor, then built to a downpour that drummed against what remained of the roof, creating a sound like thousands of urgent messages being delivered all at once. Maya stayed. She'd brought a tarp to cover her supplies, but instead she found herself drawn to the altar area, watching water pool on the stone floor, watching the way it gathered and flowed towards seams she hadn't noticed before. The water revealed what dryness had hidden. Around the base of the cross's stone mount, the pooling rain outlined cracks that formed a rectangular shape. Not damage, intention, a seam. The stones didn't match the others in the floor, their edges too precise, their color slightly different beneath the smoke stain. Maya knelt, ran her fingers along the edge. The cold she'd felt before intensified as if the stone itself held winter. She pressed harder, feeling for movement, and something shifted. Just slightly, but enough. She retrieved a crowbar from her toolbox, slid it into the seam and pulled. The stone resisted, then gave way with a sound like old secrets exhaling. Beneath it, darkness, a space. The smell that emerged was ancient. Earth and stone and air that had been sealed away so long it forgot how to move. Maya grabbed her flashlight, aimed it into the opening. Stone steps led down into shadow. The walls were carved with symbols she didn't recognize, and at the bottom, maybe 10 feet down, maybe more, she could see the edge of something that caught the light wrong. Something metallic. Something that looked like it had been waiting beneath this church for longer than Maya had been alive. Rain drummed overhead. Water dripped from broken rafters, creating a sound like whispered warnings. Behind her, the cross stood silent, its base now open and exposed, revealing the entrance it had been guarding since before fire taught this building how to burn. Maya knew she should wait. Call Daniel. Call someone. Tell the Historical Society or the police, or anyone who might know what to do when you find hidden chambers beneath churches that hold secrets your grandmother never named. Instead, she placed one foot on the first stone step. The cold rose up to meet her like recognition. The steps descended into cold that had nothing to do with weather. Maya's flashlight beam cut through darkness that felt solid, revealing stone walls carved with symbols that might have been letters once, worn smooth by time or intention. Her breath came visible in the confined space, small clouds that disappeared into shadow. Each step down felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. At the bottom, the chamber opened into something larger than she'd expected, maybe 8 feet across, barely tall enough to stand in. The walls were dry despite the rain, sealed by stone and time and secrecy. Her flashlight found the object she'd seen from above, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, resting against the far wall like something waiting to be claimed. But it was the cross that stopped her. From below, she could see what she'd never noticed from the altar floor. The iron cross's base wasn't solid stone. It was mounted on a hollow pedestal, and the bottom, where it connected to the mount, showed gaps, intentional spaces. The grooves she'd felt weren't decorative marks burned into the surface. They were instructions. Maya climbed back up, her hands shaking now, and approached the cross with new understanding. She ran her fingers along those grooves again, feeling the pattern differently. A twist here, pressure there. The cross had been made to come apart. She gripped the vertical beam and pulled. It was lighter than it should have been. Hollow. The cross lifted free from its mount with a sound like metal sighing, and Maya nearly dropped it from surprise at its weight, or lack of it. She set it carefully on the floor, then returned to examine the stone pedestal it had been hiding. The top stone had a mechanism, simple but precise. A twist counterclockwise, and something inside clicked. A panel slid open. Inside the hollow pedestal, more oilcloth bundles. Maya's flashlight beam caught the gleam of metal, and her hands moved without conscious decision, unwrapping the first bundle. Gold coins spilled into her palm, dozens of them, heavy and cold, their surfaces worn but their edges still defined. She turned one toward the light. The date stamped into the metal read 1847. An eagle on one side, a woman's profile on the other. Her thumb rubbed across the raised design, feeling history made tangible, feeling weight that had nothing to do with gold. There were more. She counted without meaning to. 43 coins in the first bundle, 51 in the second. More bundles beneath those, and at the bottom of the compartment, wrapped separately in cloth that might have been fine linen once, a leather journal. Maya's hands trembled as she opened it. The binding cracked, stiff from years in darkness. The first page showed handwriting she recognized instantly, her grandmother's but younger, steadier than the shaky script that had written the letter with the deed. The date at the top, May 3rd, 1983. The fire was necessary. The money was never ours, but I couldn't let it burn again. Maya's vision blurred. She blinked, forced herself to focus, read the next lines. Pastor Miller told me what Father found in the old cross when he rebuilt after the first fire in 23. Gold. Stolen gold from a wagon robbery in 1847. The church was built with blood money, and the men who took it hid it where they thought God would protect it, where no one would dare look. The descendants came for it in 23. They burned us down to find it. Father rebuilt, put the gold back, sealed it tighter, thought if he made the church beautiful enough, it would somehow make the theft holy. I found it after the second fire in 98. I knew what it was. I knew what I should do. I rebuilt anyway. Maya's hands shook so violently that the journal slipped from her grip. She tried to catch it, missed, and one of the gold coins tumbled from her lap and hit the stone floor. The sound it made was wrong. Too loud, too clear. The ring of metal on stone echoed in the confined chamber beneath the altar, then in the nave above, then further, into rafters and through broken walls and out into the rain-soaked night like a bell announcing something that should have stayed buried. The echo lasted far longer than physics allowed. When it finally faded, Maya realized she wasn't alone. Daniel stood in the church doorway, rain-soaked, his eyes fixed on the hollow cross lying on its side, on the open compartment, on the gold coins scattered across ash-stained floor. "You found it," he said. Not a question, not surprise, statement of fact, as if he'd been waiting weeks or years for exactly this moment. Maya couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around words that wouldn't form. She looked at Daniel, then at the journal still lying open on the floor, then at the coins gleaming in candlelight that guttered in drafts she couldn't feel. "How long have you known?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. Daniel stepped inside, slow and careful, like approaching something wounded. "My grandfather worked on the rebuild in 98. He told my father. My father told me." He knelt beside the scattered coins but didn't touch them. Everyone in Hollow Creek over 40 knows Maya. Everyone who remembers the fires. "Why didn't you—" She couldn't finish. Didn't know what she was asking. "Tell you?" Daniel looked up at her. "Your grandmother spent 40 years trying to make it right, trying to find the families who were robbed, trying to trace descendants. She never could." He gestured at the journal. "It's all in there. Every failed attempt. Every letter that came back unanswered. Every lawyer who said the trail was too old, too cold, too complicated." Maya picked up the journal with hands that still trembled, turned pages that documented decades of searching, of guilt, of rebuilding a church on a foundation of theft while trying to find a way to undo what couldn't be undone. The last entry was dated 3 months before her grandmother's stroke. "I'm leaving it to Maya, not because I think she'll succeed where I failed, because maybe she's strong enough to let it burn." The candle beside the cross went out suddenly, smoke rising in a thin line that disappeared into darkness above. Rain drummed on broken roof. Water dripped onto stone. Gold gleamed in the beam of Maya's dropped flashlight, casting reflections that danced across walls like fire that had finally found what it came for all along. And Maya knelt in the ruins of a church built on stolen gold, holding her grandmother's confession, finally understanding what some things only you can finish meant. Not restoration. Truth. Maya didn't leave the church for 3 days. She spread the journal across the altar floor, gold coins arranged beside it in careful rows, counted, recounted, categorized by wear pattern and legibility. 94 coins total. She'd weighed them on a postal scale she'd bought from the hardware store. Roughly 5 pounds. At current gold prices, maybe $80,000, maybe more. Not enough to justify 178 years of theft and fire and guilt. More than enough to finish the restoration. Daniel had left after the discovery. Said he needed to think, said she should too. But thinking felt like drowning. So Maya stopped trying and started reading instead. Her grandmother's journal documented 40 years of searching. Letters to historical societies, inquiries to genealogists, attempts to trace the 1847 wagon robbery back to victims, to find living descendants, to calculate restitution that might approach justice. June 12, 1985. The county clerk found mention of 6 families affected by the robbery. The Hendersons, the Cosas, the Kleins, the O'Malleys, the Diaz family, the Beaumonts, the Chens, most scattered west after the theft. Records end in the 1890s. September 3, 1991. Hired a genealogist. She traced the Henderson line to a woman in Portland who died in 1989. No living relatives found. Klein family ended in 1920s. She's still searching the others. March 18, 1989. The second fire took everything. I rebuilt again and used some of the gold to pay contractors. Told myself it was making something good from something bad. Told myself lies sound like prayer if you say them quietly enough. Maya's hands trembled as she read. The journal entries grew shorter near the end, less detailed, more defeated. Her grandmother had spent decades trying to untangle theft from sanctity and failed. Had rebuilt a church on stolen gold twice, knowing what it was, unable to let it burn. The final entry haunted her. I'm leaving it to Maya. Not because I think she'll succeed where I failed. Because maybe she's strong enough to let it burn. But Maya didn't feel strong. She felt like a woman kneeling in ash, surrounded by gold that belonged to ghosts, reading the confession of someone who'd loved her and lied to her in equal measure. Daniel returned on the 4th day, found her still there, still reading, still counting. He sat across from her in the ruined nave, the journal between them like evidence at a trial where both of them stood accused. Your great-great-grandfather, Daniel said quietly, was the pastor who built this place. 1848. The robbery happened in spring of 47. 6 families ruined. 3 never recovered. He gestured at the journal. She wrote it all down. The wagon was carrying payment for land claims. Gold meant to secure futures. Your ancestor called it providence when it showed up at his door. Called it God's will. Maya's throat was too tight to speak. The first fire in 1923, Daniel continued, was set by a grandson of one of the victims, Thomas Henderson. He burned it down, trying to find the gold, thought destroying the church would expose what it hid. It didn't. Your grandmother's father rebuilt, sealed it better. She knew, Maya whispered. She knew, and she kept it hidden. She tried to make it right. You've read the journal. She spent 40 years trying. She spent 40 years failing. Maya's voice cracked. And then she left it to me, like I'm supposed to. What? Finish what she couldn't? Succeed where she failed? I don't even know what success looks like here. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. She thought you'd know what to do. She thought you'd be stronger than her. The words landed like judgment. Maya looked at the gold coins gleaming in the afternoon light. At the journals documenting decades of guilt and failed restitution. At the hollow cross lying on its side, stripped of sanctity, revealed as container for theft her bloodline had protected for generations. If you've ever inherited something you didn't want to carry, you know how this feels. The weight of choices that were never yours to make. The burden of trying to fix what broke before you were born. She picked up one of the coins, turned it over in her palm. The gold was cold, heavy, unmarked by the years it had spent hidden beneath altar and prayer. It could finish the restoration, could rebuild the roof, replace the pews, restore the windows, could make the church beautiful again. Beauty built on theft. Again. Whatever you decide, Daniel said, I'll help you. The offer should have felt like support. Instead, it felt like complicity, like he was giving her permission to keep the secret, to rebuild on the same foundation of stolen gold that had burned twice before, to become the next keeper of a lie too old to kill. Maya's hands returned to the gold. It felt heavier now. Or maybe her hands were weaker. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. She'd come to Hollow Creek to rebuild a church, to honor her grandmother's memory, to make something whole from something broken. Now she sat in ruins, holding gold that had belonged to 6 families whose names she knew, but whose faces were lost to history. Families her blood had stolen from. Families her grandmother couldn't find. Families whose descendants, if they existed, were scattered beyond recovery, beyond restitution, beyond anything that looked like justice. The math was inescapable. The money could serve the community now, could rebuild something beautiful, could become good, or at least useful, even if its origins remained tainted. Wasn't that what her grandmother had tried to do? Make beauty from theft? Turn stolen gold into stained glass and polished pews and something that looked like holiness? Maya closed her eyes, tried to imagine her grandmother kneeling here 40 years ago, making the same calculations, arriving at the same rationalizations, choosing beauty over truth because truth felt too expensive to afford. When she opened her eyes, Daniel was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not judgment, not encouragement, just witnessing. Like he'd seen this moment before, lived through this arithmetic of guilt and gold with her grandmother, and knew how it ended. The church was completely silent except for dripping water somewhere in the shadows, a sound like a clock counting down toward a decision Maya didn't know how to make. Outside, clouds gathered for another storm. Inside, gold gleamed in fading light, and Maya finally understood why some truths stay buried. Not because they're too dangerous to know, because knowing them changes nothing. Maya spent 3 more days with the gold before she understood what her grandmother had been asking. She barely slept. When she did, dreams came in fragments, fire moving through walls with intention, shadows carrying weight. Her grandmother's voice, speaking words Maya couldn't quite hear. She'd wake with the taste of smoke in her mouth, the journal open on her chest, gold coins scattered across the sleeping bag she'd brought to the church, because leaving felt like abandoning evidence, or abandoning opportunity. The math was elegant in its simplicity. She'd gotten contractor estimates before finding the gold. $75,000 to finish the restoration properly. The gold was worth maybe $80,000, possibly more with the right buyer. Enough to rebuild the roof, replace every pew, restore the windows with stained glass that might even be beautiful. The church could serve the community again. Wedding ceremonies, Sunday services, a place where people who'd lost things could come to remember them. Wasn't that redemption? Turning theft into grace? Making something stolen serve something sacred? Her grandmother had tried the same calculation. Maya saw it in the journal entries, watched rationalization build across decades like sediment-forming stone. Elena had rebuilt twice using stolen gold, calling it stewardship, calling it impossible restitution, calling it anything but what it was. Maya researched the 1847 robbery obsessively. 6 families, the Hendersons, the Kleins, the O'Malleys, the Diaz family, the Beaumonts, the Chens. 3 never recovered from the loss. 2 scattered west and disappeared from records. 1 line ended in 1920. The genealogist her grandmother hired had traced fragments. A Henderson descendant who died in 1989. A Beaumont who emigrated to Australia in 1903. But the trails went cold. Generations scattered like ash. Even if Maya wanted to make restitution, to whom? How do you return? Gold to ghosts? The impossibility felt like permission. She began making lists. Materials needed. Timeline. Who she'd hire. How she'd explain the sudden funding. Inheritance, she'd say. Which was technically true. Her grandmother had left her gold stolen 178 years ago. That was inheritance, wasn't it? On the 6th day, alone in the church, Maya decided she would keep it, rebuild with it, serve the living rather than chase the dead. Her grandmother had tried for 40 years to find another way and failed. Maya would succeed where Elena couldn't, not by finding justice, but by making beauty. She lifted the hollow cross, carried it to the altar mount, prepared to seal everything back inside exactly as it had been hidden. One coin at a time, she placed them into the compartment. The weight left her hands. The cold transferred from her palms to iron darkness. The gold disappeared like confession spoken into silence that offered no absolution. 40 coins returned. 50. 60. Her hands moved mechanically, practiced, efficient. This was the right choice, the practical choice. The choice that served something larger than pride or perfect morality. 70 coins. 80. She reached for another and stopped. A piece of stained glass, one of the few fragments that survived the fire, lay propped against the wall near the altar. Afternoon light caught it at an angle, casting colored reflections across the floor. Blue and gold and deep crimson. Light refracted through damaged beauty. Maya's reflection appeared in the glass. Fragmented. Her face broken into colored pieces that didn't align. One eye blue, the other gold. Her mouth split between red and shadow. Unrecognizable. She looked like her grandmother must have looked, kneeling here after the second fire, making the same choice, seeing the same stranger staring back. The remaining coins sat in her palm. 14 left, cold and heavy and waiting. Maya looked at her fragmented face, at the cross hollow and waiting to be sealed, at the journal lying open to her grandmother's final entry, because maybe she's strong enough to let it burn. Her hands began to shake, not with weakness, with recognition. She pulled the coins back out, one by one, slow at first, then faster. Her hands moved with certainty now, reversing the decision, undoing the rationalization, refusing to become the next keeper of beautiful lies. The gold piled on the floor beside the journal. All 94 coins, every ounce of possibility and temptation. Every dollar that could have rebuilt walls and bought back some version of redemption that wasn't real. Maya sat back, breathing hard, staring at what she'd almost done. The door creaked. Daniel stood in the entrance, rain-soaked, watching her with that same unreadable expression he'd worn since the discovery. "Whatever you decide," he said again, "I'll help you." This time Maya heard what he meant. Not support. Complicity. He would help her keep the secret. Help her rebuild on the same foundation of theft. Help her become her grandmother, carrying gold and guilt until one of them got too heavy. "No," Maya said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "You won't." Daniel's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He nodded once and left without another word. Maya turned back to the gold in the journal. The church was silent except for rain on broken roof, water dripping onto stone that had held secrets too long. She couldn't seal the gold back inside the cross, couldn't rebuild with it, couldn't keep it. But she couldn't simply return it to descendants who didn't exist or might exist somewhere beyond finding. Her grandmother had spent 40 years trapped between those impossibilities. Maya would not. She lifted the journal, the only evidence of Elena's struggle, the only document of attempts at restitution, and held it against her chest. This she would keep. Not the gold, not the secret, just the record of trying and failing, the map of 40 years spent searching for justice that stayed just out of reach. The rest, the gold, the hollow cross, the truth, she would give to someone else. Let historians sort it. Let lawyers trace it. Let the state decide what justice looked like for theft so old it predated anyone alive to remember it. She would let it burn, not literally, not with fire, but with exposure, with truth, with the kind of light that doesn't flatter or forgive, just reveals. Maya pressed her palm against the cold gold one final time, then stood and walked to the door. Behind her the coins gleamed in fading light. The cross lay on its side, hollow and exposed. The church stood ruined and honest for the first time in 178 years. Outside, rain fell clean and cold. Inside, the last candle guttered and went out, leaving only the natural light of storm and ending. Maya made the phone call the morning after her decision. The woman at the State Historical Society listened without interrupting while Maya explained, haltingly, carefully, about the church, the gold, the journal, the 178 years of theft sealed inside hollow iron. There was a long silence after Maya finished speaking. Then, "We'll need to send someone. This is complicated." "I know," Maya said. "There will be an investigation, legal proceedings. It could take years." "I know," Maya said again. The relief was physical, a weight leaving her chest that she hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. But underneath the relief, terror. She'd spoken truth aloud, made it real. There was no taking it back now. That night she returned to the church one final time before the investigators arrived. She'd meant to pack up her tools, gather the journal, prepare the site for official examination. Instead, she found herself standing in the doorway, breathing in the smell of old smoke and new wood, and something else. Freedom, maybe, or just the absence of secrets. The candle she'd left burning near the altar had tipped somehow, or been knocked. She never knew which. By the time she noticed, flames were already climbing the sawdust-covered floor, catching on the new lumber she and Daniel had installed, spreading across wood that hadn't learned resistance yet. The fire moved fast, hungry for what was dry and unprotected. Maya didn't run for help. She walked, deliberately, calmly to the altar, opened the hollow cross one final time, and removed the gold. All 94 coins gathered in her arms like harvest. The journal she grabbed from where it lay, beside the empty compartment. Then she carried everything outside into air that had begun to rain again. The storm arrived as witness. Maya stood in the church parking lot, rain soaking through her clothes, gold coins clutched against her chest, journal pressed beneath them, and watched St. Catherine's burn for the third time. The flames were beautiful, orange and gold against darkening sky, reflecting in puddles, dancing across wet pavement. Smoke rose in columns that rain tried to erase but couldn't quite extinguish. The sound was constant, crackling wood, hissing steam where rain met fire, the groan of beams giving way. She thought she should feel devastation, loss, the grief of watching months of work consumed in minutes. Instead, she felt clean. The fire department arrived, sirens cutting through rain and burning, but Maya didn't move to help, didn't explain, just stood with gold and journal and rain, watching purification do what restoration never could. Daniel found her like that, standing motionless, tears mixing with rain so completely she couldn't tell which was which anymore. He didn't ask questions, just stood beside her, close enough that she felt his presence but not close enough to crowd her grief. "Maybe some things are supposed to burn," Maya said. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Yeah, maybe they are." They stood together in silence while firefighters worked, while water fought flame, while the church that had survived fire twice before finally surrendered to it completely. Maya opened the journal, her grandmother's journal, to a random page. Rain spotting the ink, but not erasing it. August 14, 1989. The fire was necessary. I see that now. Not the first one, or the second, but the one that will come. The one that burns away what shouldn't have been built in the first place. Her grandmother had known, had written it 27 years ago, had left Maya not just gold and guilt, but permission to let it burn, to choose truth over beauty, to refuse the inheritance of keeping secrets sealed inside sacred spaces. The cross fell last. Maya watched it happen, the iron structure crashing through the weakened altar with a sound like bells ringing backward, like prayer spoken in reverse, like something finally giving up its burden. The metal rang against stone one final time, then went silent. The rain intensified, not gently, a downpour that meant business, that fought flame with intention, that arrived exactly when collapse became complete. By midnight, the fire was out. What remained of St. Catherine's was less than what Maya had started with. Walls compromised, new construction destroyed. The altar area collapsed entirely. The hollow cross lay in rubble, twisted by heat, no longer recognizable as the thing that had guarded secrets for generations. Maya stood in rain that had become baptism. Gold coins still clutched in arms that had gone numb from cold and holding. The journal was soaked through now, but the ink held. Her grandmother's handwriting remained legible, permanent, honest. A firefighter approached. "You okay, ma'am?" Maya looked at him, this stranger witnessing the end of something he couldn't understand, and found herself smiling. Not happiness. Something quieter, acceptance maybe, or just the recognition that burning down isn't the same as being destroyed. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." Daniel drove her back to the motel. She carried the gold and journal inside, set them carefully on the desk, then stood under a hot shower until the cold finally left her bones. When she emerged, the gold gleamed in lamplight, clean now, waiting for historians and lawyers and whoever decided what justice looked like for theft older than anyone alive to remember. Maya picked up her phone, took a photo of the coins arranged on the desk. The journal open beside them. Evidence, confession, truth. She'd come to Hollow Creek to rebuild a church. Instead, she'd let it burn. Again. And somehow standing in a motel room with stolen gold and her grandmother's 40-year confession, Maya felt more whole than she had in months. Outside, rain continued its work. Inside, for the first time since arriving, Maya slept without dreaming of fire. 3 months later, Maya stood on ground that no longer held a church. The rubble had been cleared by the Historical Society, photographed, catalogued, removed piece by piece. What remained was earth and foundation stones, and a small brass plaque she'd commissioned. Simple words etched into metal. St. Catherine's Church, 1848. 2025, built on stolen gold, burned 3 times. This ground acknowledges theft, fire, and the search for justice that continues. Not beautiful, just true. The gold was in legal limbo, just as she'd expected. Attorneys were working to trace descendants. The process would take years, might never conclude definitively. One Henderson descendant had been found, an elderly woman named Sarah in Oregon. She'd written to Maya, not about the money, about the story, about wanting to understand what her great-great-grandfather had lost and what had been done with it since. Maya had written back. They'd exchanged letters, careful, honest, painful. Sarah didn't want restitution. She wanted acknowledgement. Recognition that the theft had happened, that it had mattered, that someone finally cared enough to name it. That was something Maya could give. She'd returned to her life in Portland, but different, lighter, somehow. She no longer walked with that peculiar tension of someone carrying weight they couldn't set down. Her shoulders sat differently. Her breathing came easier. She slept through most nights now without fire visiting her dreams. The letter from the Historical Society had arrived last week, confirming that partial restitution might be possible. Not full, never full, but something. An acknowledgement, a payment, a recognition that theft, even ancient theft, deserved response. Maya had smiled reading it, not because justice was perfect, but because someone was trying. She brought the journal with her today, her grandmother's journal. She could read it now without that crushing combination of love and betrayal, could see it for what it was, a map of trying and failing, of guilt and love existing side by side, equally real, equally honest. The final entry had haunted her for months. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you stop running from. Maya understood it now. Her grandmother hadn't been asking Maya to forgive the theft, or the silence, or the decades of keeping gold sealed beneath prayer. She'd been asking Maya to stop running from the impossibility of perfect justice, to accept that some things break in ways that can't be fully mended, and that accepting brokenness isn't the same as endorsing it. Maya sat on the foundation stones, warm from spring sun, and opened the journal to its final blank page. She'd brought a pen. Her hand was steady as she wrote, April 15, 2025. Rebuilding isn't about making things whole again. Sometimes it's about naming what broke and letting it stay broken. Not because brokenness is good, but because pretending it's whole only makes the cracks deeper. I didn't restore your church, Grandma. I let it burn. I exposed what you spent 40 years trying to fix. And somehow I think that's what you wanted all along. Not for me to succeed where you failed, but for me to stop trying to hide failure beneath beauty. The gold will find its way to whoever it should reach. Or it won't. Either way, it's not hidden anymore. That has to be enough. She closed the journal, set it carefully beside her, and looked at the empty ground where St. Catherine's had stood for 177 years. From her bag, she pulled a small rose bush, thorny, wild-looking, the kind that didn't need much care. She'd bought it from a nursery that morning, along with a small spade. Maya dug into the earth near where the altar had been. The soil was dark, rich, still carrying ash mixed with rain-washed loam. She planted the rosebush carefully, pressed soil around its roots, watered it from a bottle she'd brought. It would grow wild, thorny and unkempt. No one would tend it but her, and she'd only visit a few times a year. But it would grow anyway, the way things do when they're planted in honest ground. She stood, brushed dirt from her hands, and picked up the journal one final time. Opened it to her grandmother's final entry, the one she'd read 100 times but understood differently now. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you stop running from. Maya had stopped running. Not because she'd fixed everything, not because justice was complete, or restitution was perfect, or the story had ended cleanly, but because she'd finally learned what her grandmother had tried to teach her, that truth matters more than beauty, that exposure is sometimes the only honest form of healing, and that some inheritances are meant to be transformed, not preserved. The wind moved through the space where the church had stood. Birds sang from nearby trees. Somewhere in the distance, bells rang from another church. Not St. Catherine's, but something living, continuing, honest in its own way. Maya pressed her palm against the plaque one final time. The metal was warm from sun, smooth, permanent. Then she walked back to her car, lighter than when she'd arrived, carrying only the journal and the knowledge that some things survive fire, not by resisting it, but by finally letting it burn everything that shouldn't have been built in the first place. Sometimes the hardest inheritance isn't what's given to us. It's the choice of what to do with it. We think rebuilding means restoration, making broken things look whole again. But real rebuilding means naming what broke honestly, exposing the cracks we've been taught to hide, choosing truth over the comfort of beautiful lies. Forgiveness doesn't come from fixing the past perfectly. It comes from stopping our endless running from what can't be fixed, accepting that some things stay broken, and finding peace not in flawless resolution, but in finally telling the truth. The treasure we seek isn't always gold. Sometimes it's just the courage to let fire burn away what was never ours to keep.